And welcome. It's nice to see the amount of participation that we have here in the class, because probably the best thing that we do as a company, I think, is provide education and resources and training for our agents and business partners. It's just part of the value add that we like to do. As Kara said, my name is Jim Bolger. I manage the sales team at Keystone Closing Services, which is based out of the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. And I have 11 folks that work for me. And while they do closings and their job is to get title orders and go out there and do title business, the biggest thing I tell my folks is their job is to educate folks. Their job is to educate their agents, to educate their buyers, to educate the folks that they're dealing with on how the process works and how to do it with best practices, so that we can make the industry better, we can make the industry stronger, and really partner with great folks. This class is near and dear to my heart. Because before I joined the TRG family, I actually worked for a company that did some specialization in short sale and real estate owned properties, and dealing with the distressed financial market, as we like to call it. And with the advent of HGTV and everyone looking at real estate and things like that, it really speaks to us, because a lot of times you guys as agents might get phone calls from consumers that say, "Hey, I want to start looking at those properties." Why? Because they think they're getting a deal. And if they don't know how to navigate the waters, and you don't know how to navigate the waters, it really doesn't end up being a deal for them. It actually ends up costing them more than if they would go the traditional route. So knowing some of the pitfalls to avoid and things like that really can help you add value to your customers. And then, us obviously providing a great service to you can help, add value as well. So the different transactions we're going to discuss today are, we call them sheriff sales here in PA, but basically they're judicial sales, both foreclosure and on the tax side. It's whenever a judicial branch or an arm of government has to get involved and actually take over a property and then sell it. Short sales, real estate owned transactions or REO transactions, and then clients who have bankruptcy, and what is involved in that sort of thing. And that's both from the listing and the buy side. So just some definitions in case you haven't heard some of these before, or if the definitions I'm using might be a little bit more regionalized. I mean, generally these are nationally known, definitions, but I figured, telling you a little bit more about them might help understand what we're talking about. So a sheriff sale is a public auction that's held by a county sheriff to satisfy a judgment on a property. Usually it's the result of a mortgage foreclosure or unpaid taxes. Sometimes it can be a result of a civil judgment, depending on the type, but 90% of it you'll see is a result of a mortgage foreclosure or unpaid taxes. REO transactions, they're the sale of a property where a bank who held a mortgage is the owner of the property. Usually they're a result of a sheriff sale where they are the successful bidder, where the debtor has signed over a deed in lieu of a foreclosure. They can actually be part of the end game of a sheriff sale, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but usually the person has made a deal with the bank. Short sale is a transaction where the bank who holds a mortgage agrees to take less than the balance in order to rid a troubled borrower of the obligation. Those are definitely with some serious pitfalls from time to time. We'll talk about those in a little bit. So we're going to start with the sheriff sale. So sheriff sales don't normally traditionally involve a realtor. They're usually sales where a buyer is going to reach out to you and they're going to ask you about them because they think they're going to get a deal on it. They're usually designed for cash buyers who have a certain appetite for risk. Because what happens is the buyer shows up at the public auction and they bid, and they have to become the highest bidder. And if they're the highest bidder, they've got to make a 10% deposit at the time of the sale, and then they've got to pay the balance within a short period of time. Usually that's around 10 days. That really doesn't allow for a traditional title insurance situation or traditional title search to take place. And the amount of time that they advertise these sales to happen versus when you actually can go look at the property or actually take and actually go and bid on the property isn't long enough to do that as well. And if you also don't have a vested interest or a sales contract on it, or you don't own the property, there's some information you really can't get about the property that will help you make a decision on it. So it can lead to a situation where the buyer ends up with title situations that they weren't worried about or necessarily knew about, and then they end up costing more money because they have to spend money down the road trying to cure those issues. So Title is conveyed upon the balance being received by the sheriff's office by what's called a sheriff's deed. The new owner is now responsible for evicting anybody who's in the property. So those folks may have not have left the property yet. They may still be living in there. It's up to the new owner to actually get them evicted if it was via tax sale or via foreclosure. And if the process wasn't followed the right way, there could be a cloud on the title that may linger and will need to be handled by the new owner before selling off to the next person if they're doing it as an investment. So that brings me to REO properties, because normally what happens at sheriff sales or foreclosure sales is not necessarily that a private person comes in and buys the property for many of the reasons I talked about. Usually it's the bank that ends up being the highest bidder, because they end up with these REO properties in one of two ways. Either first, they're the highest bidder at the sheriff's sale, and they usually are because they have the most risk in the property and they don't have to worry about paying themselves to acquire the property because they're the ones that hold the mortgage. They end up just being the highest bidder, usually bidding up to their mortgage amount, and nobody's going to overbid them to get that property because they're not going to end up with a good sale unless there's a great amount of equity, in it. Or if the former owner transferred the title to the bank voluntarily to avoid foreclosure, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Sometimes that's how the bank ends up with the property and they want to market it. Now, this is a case where we do see realtors often involved with these transactions because banks don't have the time and expertise to market the properties. They have to be marketed by someone who has a local knowledge, by someone who has a local expertise, and be able to have access to multi-list and things like that, and be able to bring buyers in and out of them. Banks don't want to have to have that kind of overhead. So what they would rather do is pay a commission to a real estate agent to get the property listed and then sold. Now, they're not without pitfalls, but at least they can follow the traditional title or mortgage process to some degree, which lets you obviously be open to more buyers. So some of the concerns if you're on the listing side, first and foremost, if it was a true foreclosure and the folks were not, didn't just sign the property over to the bank, there's a good chance the house is going to be a mess. When people leave these properties, they usually don't leave in the best of circumstances. You're usually upset that they're being evicted or, being tossed out of the property. And, sometimes they do some damage, on the way out the door. Let's just face it, they might be in dire financial straits otherwise, and they didn't have the time or ability to keep up on the property. Usually the utilities are turned off because banks don't like to have to, incur additional expenses for this. This is an asset that they want to try and get out of, so they're not going to, want to pay, electric bills, gas bills, and things of that nature. So they turn off the property. Excuse me, the utilities of the property. This causes an issue because, when you go to get certain inspections done and certain appraisals done, they need to see if the water's running. They need to see if the electric works. They need to see if there's any issues. And it could cause a delay or even additional costs if an appraiser or an inspector has to go back out to recheck these sorts of things. There are safety concerns. A lot of times if people don't do due diligence and change locks and things like that, there have been cases where, someone doesn't change the locks and, key vengeance happen where people come and they go to, vandalize the property or they, harass the new owners and things like that. Obviously, you get your local police involved, but, these sorts of things can and do happen. And it's been known to happen with these sorts of properties because, folks are mad because they lost, the American dream, so to speak. Pricing to market is another concern, with REO properties. The banks have a master to serve. They're trying to keep their asset line, in good fashion. They're trying to keep the balance sheet looking good. They don't want to let it go for less than what they have to, make themselves whole or, get out of whatever their calculated risk was. A lot of times that may not be what the market bears on the property, especially if there were second mortgages involved, especially if maybe it was lent in an over equity situation, like on a renovation loan or something like that. So a lot of times you're being asked to market a property that isn't priced fairly, and that can create some concerns down the road. So let's talk about if you're a buyer's agent and your buyer wants you to go see some of these properties. What are some of the concerns we have there? First off, these properties are almost always sold as is as they sit. You're not going to, be able to, while the buyer obviously can pay for a home inspection to find out, what needs done. You're not going to get a bank to agree to fix things, on it. They're not in that position to do that sort of thing, and that creates some concerns for buyers. Delays with REOs. A lot of times they have to get a lot of signatures. There's things that need to be done in order to make the sale go through, and it has to go through a lot of red tape, where it's not the same as, you as the buyer's agent picking up the phone, calling the listing agent and say, hey, can we move closing up 3 days? Great, no problem. And that's done. A lot of times, they have to, we have to find out if the asset manager is ready to go. Do they have the deed signed? When are they going to have the deed signed? Will they be able to send money if need to be sent to the new title company? And that can, create all sorts of hassles. Was the title work done properly? This is a big one. A lot of times we find that if the judicial process wasn't followed correctly, there can be a cloud on the title. If, say, service wasn't given to all the owners of the property, I'll give you a good example. If we have a buyer and if we have two owners of a property, husband and wife that were divorced, and the second person on the property is nowhere to be found, but they still actually are owners of the property because they never finalized their divorce or they didn't sign off on the property or something like that, and only one owner is served with the foreclosure papers and the other owner has no knowledge of it, that foreclosure may not stick. And now that creates a title issue where you either A, have to go get a quiet title action to eliminate that other person, or B, you actually have to find them to get them to sign off on their interest of the property. And then they want paid to do that sort of thing because they had an interest of the property and kind of hold you hostage a little bit. So due diligence is important. That's one of the reasons why that same thing could happen in the sheriff's sale that I talked about first, and that could create, issues that are too hard to get of. At least this with the traditional, if you can follow the traditional title insurance and title search path, you can sit there and say, hey, maybe you walk away with, maybe just losing a little bit of hand money, or, not even if they don't have marketable title to the property. Another potential issue is subordinate liens, with this. A lot of times that first mortgage holder was not the only person who had a lien on the property. There may still be other junior liens that are hanging around waiting to be paid when this property is sold. That can cause the bank an issue down the road because now they might have to sit there and say, hey, wait a minute, I need to recalculate or re-ask the asset manager if there's something that's going to do. All right, so short sale. For short sales, this is when the current owner works out a deal with the mortgage holder to settle the mortgage owed for less than the current balance. This is usually a little bit less messy than a true foreclosure, or less messy than a sheriff's sale, because owners in the house, they're talking with the bank ahead of time. There's some expectation for what's going to transpire, and some expectation for what they think they can get, for the property. There's usually a lot less fees involved with this because there is no attorney fees, there's no court costs, there's no filings and things like that need done. And because the properties are generally occupied, they're usually be more marketable, than ones that had been abandoned or foreclosed upon. Again, realtors are usually involved in these transactions because the folks reach out to the bank and says, hey, we've got a financial issue. We know that we owe more on the property than it's probably worth. Can we work out something? And they negotiate with the bank, and then the bank says, hey, yes, we'll take this for it. And then they get that information to a realtor, and the realtor does their homework and lists it for an appropriate amount of money. These can be with pitfalls as well too, because yes, they follow the traditional mortgage and title insurance process to a certain degree. There's still some pitfalls we have to look out for, both on the listing and the buyer side. So first, our concerns if we're a listing agent. We often have to serve two masters. We're serving the seller who actually lives in the property right there. They have a financial goal they're trying to get to, and then of course we have the bank, because the bank doesn't want to lose any more money than they absolutely positively have to. So usually we only have to go back to one person when we have a traditional sale with just one owner, and just, make sure that they're happy, make sure that the transaction is flowing along their timeline. Now it's a little different because, the bank might have their own sets of concerns that they want to, and they're almost always just from a financial process. The approval process can also be very lengthy, in getting people to sign off on it and getting mortgages, getting mortgages ready, getting the paperwork ready to actually satisfy the mortgage, might need a lot of signatures and a lot of approvals within a bank, especially the larger the bank that it is. There's also usually other potential title issues, because if people get into financial distress, they're not just in financial distress in their mortgage, you're usually in financial distress in their taxes, you're usually financial distress in their credit cards and things like that. And that can also create judgments and things that need to be addressed as far as their financial situation goes, and can create title issues, as far as clouds on the title and liens that need to be satisfied. A lot of times buyers lose patience, with this process, because they're trying to get to close on a certain date, because maybe they have a lease that's up if they're a first-time home buyer, or maybe they have the sale of their own property that's going through, and that's going through smoothly, and they're trying to move over to the new property. That can create issues as well too, and might have the buyer want to walk away if dates aren't hit, or if their timeline's not hit, and that leads the seller back to square one, and they still own a property that they can't make their mortgage payments on. The buyer concerns, as I mentioned, buyers do get frustrated. They lose trust. A lot of times, because all this activity happens behind the curtain for them, they don't have the ability to see what's going on. And so they somehow feel that they can't trust what's going on because they're not involved in the transaction. There's some, almost like magical Wizard of Oz that's behind the curtain, at the bank somewhere that's pulling the strings. And that can create buyers, to have frustration. So a good conversation up front with a buyer who's seriously considering a short sale property is not a bad idea. Sit down, talk to them, tell them about what the process looks like, tell them about how the approval process works, and let them know, listen, you might end up getting a really good deal on this, but there's going to be times when you're going to get frustrated. There's going to be times that you're going to have to trust me, and that we're not going to make a bad decision together. And let's talk about that sort of thing. Timing. Obviously, if the buyer's getting out of the lease, or if they're selling their own property, there are timing issues to worry about. And what happens if the sale does delay, and the sale of their property that they're moving out of goes forward? What are they going to do during that time? Are they going to have to get storage units? Are they going to have to live in a hotel, live with relatives, that sort of thing? Having an upfront conversation with buyers about the fact that, this may take longer. Here's what we may need to do. It prepares them for that. Have them think about a contingency as, what if this drags on a little longer than it's wanted? It may make them want to walk away from it and look at traditional houses. Great, that's fine. But it also will at least level set with them and say, hey, listen, I know what I'm getting into now. And then there's no animosity down the road, when that sort of thing. So seller reluctance leads to foreclosure action at the 11th hour. So sometimes, what happens is because this is a mortgage that, is delinquent, they're having trouble with it. That's why we're, approaching the short sale process. If the seller doesn't feel like they're getting enough out of it, because a lot of times there is a negotiation for like a small amount of money for the seller to have some moving expenses or things like that paid. If their costs start to mount up with it, a lot of times they just say, to heck with it, go ahead, try and take the house, whatever. Or the time elapses and they end up going through with the judicial proceedings anyways. And then that creates a whole nother set of issues, because we have to have service and things like that. So it does create some issues from time to time, but I think taking a step back, we'll be able to, taking a step back, we'll be able to have, a good conversation with our buyers, and let them know, hey, listen, we may end up having an issue. Just be prepared that, things could go sideways and we'll end up in a better spot. So some tips, for dealing with short sales. First and foremost, use a short sale addendum. It's critical. It gives details of the transaction. It gives you out. It gives the seller out. It lets everybody know what's going to happen with it. It gives contingencies upon which the contract can be canceled or executed. It also provides what the bank's approval of the short sale will look like. It gives them an idea of what the approval process is. Also allows for specific time where the buyer is willing to wait for the short sale approval. So some of these things that we talked about, some of these things that we talked about can be mitigated in the short sale addendum, and allowing the buyer and seller to have certain amounts of time to review everything. Talks about how the buyer's earnest money deposit is released, what the terms of that will look like, and that also gives the buyer some some peace of mind, as to them not taking a financial loss if something goes sideways on them. Again, property inspections. A lot of times the bank's not going to pay for anything, when it comes to a property inspection, but it at least allows maybe the buyer to walk away if certain things happen during the property inspection period, just like we would on a regular traditional sale. Costs. This is an important thing to put in this short sale addendum, because a lot of times, the more costs that pile up on the seller side that normally the seller would traditionally pay for, the less likely that they are to get out from underneath it. If maybe the buyer is willing to absorb, some more costs, like maybe paying additional tax or an additional recording fee or something like that, that the seller might normally pay traditionally, that might help, with that, for a small amount of cash up front, you end up getting a better deal on a piece of property. And what does the consideration of multiple offers look like on a property? Obviously, if you're some of these deal with the listing side versus the selling side, are they allowed to just accept the highest and best offer? Do they have to accept the offer that makes the most sense to the bank? Can the bank accept whatever offer they want? All these sorts of things are put into the short sale addendum. So tips in general when dealing with REOs or foreclosures, just some things to talk about the first time foreclosure buyer, to give them a few quick tips. Number one, make new keys as soon as possible. The lockbox key is usually the only one that's available to the buyer. You don't know how many people have a copy. Tell them, get it rekeyed, get it taken care of. If there's a garage door opener, get it reprogrammed. If there's a security gate, get it reprogrammed. Don't leave anything to chance. Don't, think that, you heard that the seller moved out to 5 states away or something like that. You don't know if they had a maid or a family member or something like that who had a key. Be safe. Along those same lines, buy a home warranty. A lot of times, the buyer purchasing that home warranty, a lot of home warranties actually include like a rekeying service, for that first time. So, buying a home warranty will help if there's any unexpected costs, down the road. It helps with the fact that you're buying the property completely as is. That might, defray some expenses that the new property owner might have, along with that. Check the title report early on. I cannot stress this enough. As the agent, go over the title report with a fine-tooth comb. In my state, it's actually written in the sales agreement that I have to deliver the title commitment to the buyer, to the seller, to the buyer's agent, and the seller's agent within X amount of days. And when we deliver that, I can't tell you how many times we have agents that don't look at it. Look at it. Take a look over. If you don't understand something, call your title representative. Ask them about it. Talk to them about things on there that maybe don't make any sense. This way, you can actually be prepared and know what's going to happen up front, know if there's something that's going on, in a property, and know if there's something that you need to, address, or if it's something that might be worth walking away from because you realize that you're not going to have marketable title to a property. So bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is a little different in that it has less to do with the property and more to do with the property owner themselves. Either party having a recent bankruptcy can cause issues with the transaction. Now, the listing side has far more hidden pitfalls to worry about than does the seller. And bankruptcy doesn't necessarily kill a great deal, but there's a lot more upfront work that needs done. So if by chance you walk into a client's house and you're going on a listing appointment, they mentioned they recently filed bankruptcy, time to take a second to pause, determine if you're able to proceed, because sometimes you can proceed and sometimes you can't. Same thing with the buyer, who said that they filed bankruptcy recently. You'll probably want to take a moment of pause there as well too, to make sure that you can proceed. At a minimum, you're going to want to need to see that the bankruptcy is discharged, and there might be some further limitations from there. So on the listing side, if we take a listing appointment where we hear that the buyer is in, the seller is in bankruptcy, we need to first thing make sure the sellers can legally sell the property. A lot of times there has to be a court order from the trustee that says that they're allowed to sell the property while they're in the middle of the bankruptcy, or even after the bankruptcy has been started. So we need to make sure that that's going to happen. Will the sellers be underwater? A lot of times, if there's debts that have piled up, some of these debts might be secured. And if they're secured, they don't just go away in bankruptcy. They could actually attach to the property that we're trying to list. And that could create a whole nother set of circumstances where at the 11th hour, the seller doesn't understand that they need to come to the table with money. They're expecting they're going to walk away with a couple bucks or something like that. And that's not necessarily what's going to happen. So make sure, that we know the whole scenarios of it. Taxes could be an issue because taxes don't go away in a bankruptcy. They're one of the debts that actually survive a bankruptcy. Are there undischarged debts and other secure debts that we have to worry about? And was there prior judicial action that happened before the bankruptcy? A lot of people file bankruptcy because of an event. Maybe they're sued and a judgment is filed against them and they can't afford to pay the judgment. So they file bankruptcy. If that judgment happened prior to them filing bankruptcy, the judgment necessarily doesn't go away. There's a set of rules that have to be followed. And obviously, you'll want to talk to the bankruptcy attorney about it, but don't just assume that because someone has a bankruptcy or they claim it's been discharged or dismissed that you're free to proceed. You want to get some information from their from their bankruptcy attorney and look to see that they are actually permitted to sell the property that they're trying to sell. And that doesn't matter what chapter of bankruptcy. If they're in the middle of a Chapter 13 bankruptcy and they're doing a structured resettlement, they still need permission to sell the property because part of the resettlement might be if they sell that property and there's any equity, it has to be distributed equally amongst creditors or maybe even possibly given to secured creditors first. If it's a Chapter 7 bankruptcy and they're going to sell the property, it very well may be that there's certain distributions that need done even to unsecured debtors unsecured creditors before the bankruptcy is discharged. So that might be a concern too, and that's a situation where it could end up with our sellers underwater. So we need to be very careful if we hear that a seller's in bankruptcy. Obviously, if a buyer says that they're in bankruptcy, number one, we need to find out if they even qualify to buy a home. Closely examine the pre-approval. A lot of times, buyers go to mortgage brokers and they go to consumer discount companies and things like that will pre-qualify them for a mortgage. But if we don't closely look at it and see what the terms are, it might be they can qualify for like a 50% loan to value, but are they really going to be able to come up with 50% down if they just got out of bankruptcy? Do they have the financial wherewithal to meet up to the the terms of the pre-approval that they have? So. All right, so as Kara said, that's the end of the formal part of the class. We'll take some questions on from the chat. I know there were some questions on there, so I'll rely on Melanie to tell me what the questions are, where we're at in there. But again, go to trgc.com/virtual training. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Register for our winter classes. We've got some great content up there that can really help you guys as real estate agents, and be able to just learn and become better at our crafts. So.
And yes, we definitely do have questions coming in for you.
Awesome.
We're going to be jumping around here a little bit, so between subjects. So hopefully we'll be able to stay on track for you. We do have a question here with regard to the tax sales, and it says, are they bidding on only the taxes, or is there more? Is it possible to walk away only paying for the taxes if, for instance, there's no lender that shows up to the bid? So
it's possible, but you don't know unless you've done a complete title search on the property. Because what happens is the taxing authority that has the ability to sell, they hold the auction. They're only looking to get their tax money. So you may pay that and get the sheriff's deed. However, when you go to actually sell the property, you may find out that there's other liens that were not satisfied, and you're not responsible for those. Now, normally what happens in that case is if there is a lender or a bank involved, they're going to show up, because even though the tax might be senior to the tax might be senior as far as position goes, the lender has a bigger equity stake. they're going to show up because they're given notice of the tax sale and they're going to bid up to it. And it's actually more likely that the lender got notice that there was delinquent taxes and they force paid the taxes and then actually just added it to the borrower's account and said, hey, you owe me this tax money. And then they even try and force place an escrow on it, because most mortgages actually have a provision in them that say that if you don't pay your taxes, I have the right to pay them for you, and I can go ahead and add them to your account and collect them or force place an escrow.
Thank you. That makes sense. All right. The next three questions are about the bankruptcies. I'm going to kind of ask two of them together here. Are we relying on the seller to tell us about the bankruptcy? And is there a way to do a search on your buyer or seller client to see if they've had or in a bankruptcy?
Yeah. So great question. So yes, we do. We do rely on the seller to tell us that they're in bankruptcy. One of the things that when they sign a listing agreement is that they can provide clear and marketable title to the property. Providing clear and marketable title to the property is the fact that they're out of bankruptcy or they've been given the authority to sell the property, by the U.S. trustee, in bankruptcy. Is there a way to run a search? It is public record. The U.S. court. The U.S. District bankruptcy courts are all in the system called PACER. It is a paid service, but anybody can access it, and you can search and see if it's on there. But to be fair, you have partners that can do that. That can do that for you. In your title company and in the mortgage lenders that you're doing business with. If someone gets a pre-approval, they're going to know. Because their credit report's going to come back and it's going to show that there's a bankruptcy filed, and it should show the active status on it. And same thing with a list on the listing side. One of the first things we do is search for bankruptcies and judgments, because they're so hard to qualify for.
And I think you actually just answered the next question. How can you find out if a bankruptcy is discharged?
Yep. So same thing through PACER. Credit reports will show when bankruptcies have been discharged, but the PACER court system is the easiest way to find out. And you can also ask the buyer or seller for their discharge document. Right.
We're gonna change gears a little bit here, and this question is in reference to short sales. Why do some lenders not accept an offer even when an approved price has been submitted?
Yeah, so great question. A lot of times it could deal with something that they find out after the fact. Here's a perfect example. We just had a case where the bank found out that there was inheritance tax owed on the property, because what had happened is the reason the house was short sold was because the mother had passed away. A daughter was also living there and also on title to the property. Mom held the mortgage, and they realized the property wasn't worth it because mom didn't keep up on it, so they went to negotiate a short sale. Didn't realize there was actually an inheritance tax that was actually owed from downstream on it, and it didn't cover enough for it. So when we did the title search, we found out that they hadn't filed the estate's final return yet, because the mother died intestate without a will, and then there's an inheritance tax issue. Well, that's a cost that the bank didn't allow for. So now they've got to recalculate that in their price, and a lot of times they'll say, "I'm sorry," or "Hey, will you handle this?" Or sometimes they just walk away and start over.
Interesting. Kind of back to the REO. Mm-hmm. Somebody in the audience wants to know: is this similar to a lis pendens, or what? How does a lis pendens come into play?
Lis pendens is a little different. A lis pendens is a judicial term for an action that's filed against the property. It doesn't necessarily have to be, with an REO. We had a situation where a seller had an easement agreement with their their neighbor. They weren't living up to their end of the easement agreement. They found out that they were selling the property. They actually filed a court case against the seller of our property to stop them from, to have them live up to their end of the easement so that they couldn't just transfer the problem over to the new buyer. So that created a lis pendens, which is it's a formal court case that needs to be taken care of, because it could add a judgment to the property that could cause a cloud on title.
Thank you. What is home path?
I'm not 100% sure I know that, but if it is what I think it is, it's just a computer system or a website that actually lists some REO properties for that. So I might have to check into that. It might be like Fannie Mae's. If I'm not mistaken, it's actually Fannie Mae's system that says what properties are up for foreclosure, up for REO that are Fannie insured or Fannie owned. I'll try and circle back with that, but I'm 99% sure that's what it is. It's been a while since I've been on the mortgage side, but I'm pretty sure Home Path is either Fannie or Freddie's computer system that tells you what foreclosed properties are out there that are insured by them. I just never remember which agency it is.
All right, and when Jim gets that information back around to us, we'll make sure we get it out to you. Thank you for the question. All right, I'm not sure exactly what they're asking here. Sometimes municipalities require you to pay fees if the property is not occupied.
Yeah, so yes, that is correct. So a lot of times, if a property is sitting vacant, the local municipality will have a fee that they charge to the current owner, for upkeep, because a lot of times they're not upkeeping the property. The grass is overgrown. They're not always paying someone to come out and cut the grass. And if a local municipality finds that out, they might charge a fee to the owner, and that fee is actually lienable. So that's we talk about things that aren't why would a bank not approve a short sale even at an agreed upon price? They may find out that when they go to get the municipal is okay to sell the property free and clear of any municipal liens, you may find out that they owe a couple $1,000s more in maintenance and things like that because the borough or the city came in and cut the grass or shoveled the driveway for them.
All righty. We have some of the audience members back to the home path. One says it's when FHA has a foreclosure, and the other one says it's with Freddie. So I think we'll still need to circle back around on that one. How does one become an REO agent?
Well, it's probably going to vary. It's probably going to vary by state. I don't know if you need to be certified in your particular state. So check with your broker about any licensing requirements. But in general, you need to find out who the asset manager is for a bank and get on a list with them to become one of their listing agents. You'll usually have to meet with someone and show that you have credentials and that you've listed so many properties and things like that, and they'll want to know that you have some knowledge in this arena before they'll do it. But you have to find out who the asset managers for banks are first to start, and then you talk with them and market the same way you market folks to give you listings and for buyers to come to you.
This is a good question. If there's a delinquency with an HOA, can they force a sale, or is it just a lien on the property?
Okay, so it is just a lien. It is just a lien on the property. If there's a mortgage on it, okay. If there's no mortgage on the property, they technically could force a sale. What'll happen if there's an HOA and they become delinquent? they're going to go to the mortgage holder and say, same as taxes, hey, we're about ready to put a lien on this property because the association dues aren't paid. So would you mind, throwing us the money? And then the mortgage holder will put it out, and then the same thing, they'll add it into escrow. No lender is going to want to, lose their position or have to go through the bidding process for, even a couple $1,000s in HOA. In HOA dues. If there's not a mortgage on the property, they could technically file a lien and then go and ask the court to do that. But 9 times out of 10, what happens is it's not worth it for them to file the money. They have to weigh, how much am I getting versus, how much am I going to spend in legal fees to do that. So what they'll do is they'll let that lien sit there. It becomes a nuisance lien. And then when it comes time to sell the property, someone's going to have to take care of it at that point because they made it lienable.
That's a good point. Jim, we have got questions that are continuing to pour in, and we still have a little over 15 minutes. Do you want to take a quick sip of water before I pepper you with more?
You know what? Now let's keep going. But by the way, HomePath is a Fannie Mae program that can help you move into a foreclosed home with financial assistance. So it is a program through Fannie Mae that actually will help you move into a foreclosed home. So it's something through Fannie Mae for them to help market that.
So everybody who voted for Fannie Mae gets a star. All right. Do lenders ever receive the insurance on the property first and then place it on the market? Situation.
So if there's a claimable event. So let's say, for example, a house was damaged in a fire or something like that, and it's underwater and the folks can't rebuild or something like that. The insurance money would go to the bank to cover that sort of thing, ahead of time. But a lot of times they're working with the homeowner to get it rebuilt, because it's more marketable as a fully standing structure than it is, a shell that needs torn down or something like that. But sometimes they will get the insurance money. It depends on if there was a insurable event that happened.
Thank you. All right, now I still have nightmares over this next question, so I'll let you take it. Does an accepted offer on a short sale stop a foreclosure in process?
No, it does not.
That's why I still have nightmares.
Yep. Especially if we're already in the judicial phase. Especially if there's already a sale. Especially if there's already a sale that's scheduled. Because it's already been advertised. It already happened. Only the lender actually withdrawing that order. And actually them going and stopping it. It doesn't happen automatically. The lender has to go and do it. And a lot of times the lender's not going to do it, because that's the only leverage they have.
Can we ask a young millennial about an outstanding student loans, or if they are up to date? And this is coming from a real estate agent now, or should that be for the loan officer?
Well, it's tough to ask someone, do you have any outstanding student loans? And be compliant with the, with fair credit laws and fair lending laws and things like that. A loan officer should be best off to find that by getting authorization to pull credit, and then what's out there. If, on the other hand, it comes up in conversation, and you're just really good at getting conversation out. If someone says to you, well, I went to Princeton. Oh, wow, Princeton, that's a fantastic school. Did you end up getting scholarships, or what made you go to Princeton? And they said, no, I'm in debt up to my eyeballs. They say, oh, wow, well, hey, the student loans are deferred for so many years. You might be able to get them talking to where they volunteer that information, but coming out and not asking them that question, I don't think it's gonna fly in the face of many fair lending laws. So.
With you on that one. I just taught fair housing this morning. So
Yep.
What are the benefits of buying a short sale property, if any?
So you could end up getting a deal. Because a lot of times the bank wants out from underneath it because it's an underperforming asset. A house and a mortgage is an asset to a bank. It is a mortgage-backed security that is sitting on their books that is underperforming. And if it's underperforming because it was bought in 2008 during the mortgage meltdown when they were lending 150% loan to value, and those people just happen to keep making the payments and never refied, and the bank sits there and says, "Holy bleep, I'm underwater." They don't know how far underwater they are. You might end up getting a deal, and especially because people are probably still living in it. People are still occupying it. They're still taking care of it. So it's not going to run some of the risks that you have with the REO. So that could be the benefit to it. A lot of times, you do see these with, where they're off market sales too, where, I know I'm in trouble, and my brother has been wanting to buy a house forever. I go to him and say, "Hey, listen, I know I'm underwater, but I know you got cash. Do you want to buy my house?" And that might, and because, I'm able to do that, and negotiate with, and you have a willing buyer, you might be able to, help matters along.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions. You've mentioned a couple of websites in your discussion today. One was to look for tax sales, and the other was to check on title. I don't remember that one, but
yeah. So I mean, people always ask all the time. It's a good question because most counties are online now with who the owners are. You can look up mortgages and things like that, and they say, "Hey, but because I'm checking on one question. Won't most of these issues show up on quick title searches? The mortgage that is currently on the property, sure, you can find that out quickly. Who the current owner of record is, and did that transfer recently? Sure, that can show up on thing. But what's not going to show up is, did the owner also not pay taxes for the past 10 years? And that is a lot of time. And how much has accrued in that if they haven't? You might be able to go and look back 2-3 years in some, but if it's been years since there's been taxes paid and it just never has caught up to them because municipalities are behind in that sort of thing, and we have that here in Western PA for sure. No, it takes 20-25 days to get that information, especially now with COVID and county courthouses being shut down from time to time. So it does create an issue. Every county is different as far as what they have, what's online. Every state's a little bit different. I know, for example, I've done business in Maryland, even though I don't technically live there now. Maryland, everything's online 100% of the time. Western Pennsylvania, out of our 10 counties that make up the Pittsburgh greater metropolitan area, 8 of them are online, 2 aren't. So it really all depends on the local area and the local market. Most of the bigger lenders do list and have assets listed where you can find foreclosed properties, on them. It's a matter of Googling their website. You can Google, PNC mortgage, foreclosed houses, and they have a whole list of, houses that you can go and look at. So.
Excellent, Jim. I think you actually just answered Mr. Ramirez's question, but we'll see if there's anything else you want to add to it. Won't most of these issues show up on a fast track quick title search?
Yeah, and that's the basic ones. The current mortgage, maybe a current second mortgage will, but an inheritance tax issue is not going to show up on a quick title search. A judicial lien is not going to show up on a quick title search.
Perhaps for everybody else in the audience, expand a little bit on what a fast track quick title search is as compared to what a title company would be doing.
Yep. So a fast track quick title search is a quick look at the county, the county records to show, what the current mortgage is on it, who the current mortgage holder is, who the current owner of record is on it. And, has maybe the last mortgage been satisfied. A full title search goes back to the beginning of time or the developer's deed, whatever comes first. In Pennsylvania, we go back 30 years or to the developer's deed to search every single chain of title to make sure that there was no break in the chain of title. That's another issue that can happen too. As I was talking about these service issues, when you have servicing issues, when you have a foreclosure, if I didn't give proper judicial service, That's not going to show up. You're just going to see a clean sheriff's deed from the mortgage holder to the person. But if I don't go back and make sure that all the people that were properly served, I could have a cloud on title, because there could be a owner that has prior standing that was not given proper service and actually could still have an interest in that property.
Wouldn't a lender pay the taxes, the property taxes, to keep the property out of a tax sale, in your experience?
Yeah, and I mentioned that before. Most times they will. They will, even if there's not an escrow account. Most of the time they will. But it all depends on the size of the lender, who they are, things like that. Some smaller boutique lenders may not. They may let it go to sale and then go and show up because, they feel that they can do better that way. Most large box lenders are going to do that.
Excellent. All right, we've got just a few more questions here. So is it illegal to sell your home to a relative if you are underwater? And then they put arm's length transaction. So
it's not necessarily illegal, but you would need to take a look at the mortgage itself, and see, are you allowed to sell that? Are you allowed to sell that, property, to, a relative? You'll want to reach out to the bank. I mean, it's not necessarily illegal, because if the bank's a mortgage holder, they're going to have to agree to the property. Now, if you're just trying to sell it to your relative and then them just take over the payments being underwater, well, you might be violating the terms of the mortgage, because the mortgage may say that that the mortgage isn't transferable or assumable, and they could actually call the mortgage right then and there as soon as they catch wind that the property is transferred. So, illegal, no. Could it possibly violate the terms of the mortgage? More than likely.
Thank you. The last couple of questions are asking for your opinion, picking your brain a little bit. With inventory so drastically low, are short sales and foreclosures really anticipated?
Yeah, so they are still, because number one, there's people in financial trouble right now in the country. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. I mean, look, yes, the market is hot. When someone lists a good marketable home, they're selling quickly. There's multiple offer situations, but you do have legitimate people who are, not making their payments right now, and they haven't, not everybody knows every solution they have to them. A lot of people don't realize and say, hey, listen, even though I, have a mortgage right now and I can't make the payments, they're not thinking to just list the property and thinking they can get out from underneath it and start over and go rent an apartment or something like that. So that, they don't always think that through. So they do just let it go into foreclosure. You also, have people that are passing away, and they don't make the mortgage payments, and they really don't have a next of kin or anything like that is willing to take over. So they're still going to be out there. Are they going to be as prevalent as they were from 2008 to 2012 during the mortgage meltdown? Nah, probably not. But they're still there. And there's still some inventory left from that overzealous heyday, where people were lending 150% loan to value without appraisals. There's still consumer discount companies out there that are lending third mortgages on properties without appraisals, and that's creating people to be underwater too, and can create the same situations that we're talking about here.
And that kind of segues right into the next question. And by the way, they also say very good content. Thank you very much. Do you have any intelligence regarding when the mortgage forbearance might end and how many properties could end up for sale as a result of the pandemic? Kind of right in line with what you were just saying.
Yeah, so I mean, intelligence of how much in numbers, no, I don't live in that space anymore outside of dealing with my partners that I deal with in lending. To know it as much, being on the title side is enough immersion into it, but it's probably not. I mean, the forbearance itself isn't going to end anytime soon, because there's still the current government that's in place is more inclined to give to give social help than the previous one. And listen, I'm not talking politics here. I'm just saying it's well known that this government is trying to push for help the people and not just leaving every man for themselves. So you can read between the lines here, and that should answer your question on how long I think it's going to go on. So.
Believe it or not, the questions are still coming in, but we're down to the wire. A lot of the questions have been asking if this class has been recorded. The answer is yes. You can see the website on your screen, trgc.com/virtual training. If you will go there, it'll probably be up sometime next week. Scroll down to the bottom of that page and you will see a link for our expertise on demand. And that will contain all of our video recordings for this class and many of the others that we have done. And again, I'm just going to pick this question as last because they've been waiting. Do you prefer doing short sales or REOs?
So you know what? It depends on the buyer. It depends on the buyer. A buyer who has an appetite for being able to do some rehab, maybe is handy and can take their time to possibly rehab a property. An REO is probably better for them because they're probably going to have some work to do. In the case of someone who's just looking for a deal and maybe has some patience, probably short sale is better for them.
And if you're willing, we've got 2 more minutes, so maybe 2 more questions.
Of course, I'm always.
Okay. So if the inheritance tax does not show on the title search, and if it has not been paid, where can it be found as owed?
So it's not going to ever show on. It's never going to show on the quick title search, okay? Because it just doesn't show up there. We get it by searching whatever court manages the inheritance tax in the state that you're in. You get the social security number of the descendant or the death certificate of the descendant, and you search those things. It's called the Register of Wills office in Pennsylvania. It's probably called in some place it might be the Bureau of Vital Statistics. Everyone would be called a little bit different, but whoever manages the collection of the inheritance tax, they know, because as soon as someone dies, a lien's filed automatically on it. That's what happens, is it filed on all the property so there can be the collection of the inheritance tax. So you would find that at the court that manages that or the department that manages the collection of the taxes. That's where the search is done.
All right. Final question. I'm interested in getting into this space. How does one find their first short sale or REO?
Well, the first REO would be by contacting asset managers at banks. Start with smaller regional banks is what I would say. Everyone's in a little different area. Going to try and be Bank of America's asset manager, good luck. They've got people they've been working with in areas for a while. If you're in West Virginia, for example, and Bank United, they're probably looking for people to help market their properties because they're in the same boat, just at a smaller scale. So that's it. Short sale is a matter of unique advertising. Finding, it's talking to your the sphere of influence. It's getting to know people, and maybe as you're doing social media, and you're posting what you can do out there. One of the things maybe talk about is, hey, if you're having financial difficulties, the market now is so good. It might be a good time for you to think about listing. Don't let your house go into foreclosure. Don't let your thing go. Let's talk about, can we list your property, and get more conversations with people. The more people that you advertise to in that space and can reach out and call you, then you can, start developing things. That it's not something where, you're going to, with the short sale space, you're going to have to find the clientele by being unique in your advertising.
Thank you so much, Jim. And thank you in the audience for being with us today. We did have a packed class, and that's certainly reflective of both Jim's expertise on the subject and his energy that he brought to the subject, which was wonderful. And again, with the questions that we did not get to, we'll go ahead and send them over to Jim, and we'll see if we can do some sort of a follow-up email out to all of you. But for today, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you for our next classes. Just go to trgc.com/virtual training for our upcoming classes, as well as the link to the video replays. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Take care.